Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the third event in the online portion of the Sovereign Intimacies exhibition. I'm Jennifer Smith, one of the co-curators of Sovereign Intimacies, an exhibition put on in partnership between Gallery 1C03, Plug-in ICA, and with support of Video Pool Media Art Center. I am the guest curator for Gallery 1C03 and have had the absolute honor and privilege of co-curating this exhibition with Nasrin Himada, the curator at Plug-in ICA. We are here on Treaty 1 territory, the territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and homeland of the Métis Nation. For me, this land acknowledgement is about acknowledging my Métis ancestors who have always inhabited the lands in and around Winnipeg. Today, I think it's especially important to acknowledge this as it's the 135th anniversary of Louis Riel's execution by the Canadian state. Sovereign Intimacies is an exhibition that grew from the relationships that Nasrin and I have been building. Our care for each other was woven into this exhibition, and our care for the exhibition is reflected in our care for each other and our community. We talked about artists working in similar ways to us, artists who learn from each other, who value each other, and these artists are leading and complicating discussions about diaspora, culture, decolonization, and all while finding a place for joy, love, and respect of each other and the lands that they live and work on. This exhibition is meant to be a continuing conversation with the work in the gallery space and a large component of online programming to contribute to this conversation. Currently, the exhibition space is closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are very happy to still be able to gather here tonight with Iris Yirei. And I would also like to acknowledge the other artists in the exhibition, Hassan Ashraf, Annie Beach, Ayumi Gato, Melanie Monoceros, Peter Morin, Mariana Munoz Gomez, Wanda Nanabush, M. Norbese Phillip, Megan O'Brien, Marianne Redhead, Cheyenne Thomas, and David Thomas. Before I hand this over to Nasrin to introduce us to Iris this evening, I would also just like to thank Jennifer Gibson from Gallery 1C03, who helped organize this event and has been an integral part of organizing the exhibition. Thank you to Evan from the University of Winnipeg, who is helping out with the live stream, and to all of the team at Plug-in ICA for all of the hard work that they have contributed to this program. So Nasrin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Jen. I thank you. I'm honored and so privileged to have worked with you on this exhibition. I feel so lucky. I feel so lucky that we're here tonight too with Iris. And yeah, I want to thank Jennifer Gibson as well for helping coordinate this, and Evan, who's behind the scenes. I am Nasrin Himada. I'm the curator at Plug-in ICA, as Jen mentioned. And I'd like to just take a few moments to give context and background to how I got here, how my family was able to make a life on these lands and territories and waters. And I'm here because my family was forced off of their own lands and couldn't make a life from where they come, from where my ancestors come. I am from Palestine, from a place called Tarshiha. My grandparents were the last of my family's generation to have lived on their lands in Tarshiha. They had to escape in 1948 because of the occupation and ran by foot across the border into southern Lebanon and became refugees in Beirut. Through the colonial systems that enforce migration and that enable further colonial conquest by way of immigration in so-called Canada, my parents were given citizenship and have lived in many different parts of this land since 1989. I've mostly made my life in Tiohtià:ke in so-called Montreal for 15 years, the longest place I've lived in. So I call it my home, and then had the honor and absolute privilege to move here, to now live here, to work here, and to meet incredible people like Jen here on Treaty 1 territory, the territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. It is my absolute pleasure tonight, and I'm thrilled to introduce Iris Yirei, who is one of the exhibition artists in Sovereign Intimacies, as Jen mentioned, and who's here tonight to talk with us about the incredible installation featured in the exhibition. She's also here to talk about her general practice, which really does connect to how we make relations with the people around us and the lands that we are on, and how these intimacies manifest in our life and practice. Iris's work for me is a good example of how there's no distinction between how one lives and between how one practices or cultivates a practice. That art and life combine in an ethics formed by care, by listening, and by being present. Iris centers a deep commitment to cultivating relationships and intimacy with the histories of people and places in which she encounters, conditioning an ethical framework that connects these histories to the earth, creating a space for how sustainability and awareness are part and parcel of these relations. Iris creates a line of connection between all the elements that come to form our knowledge of place and of being. And she uses art as a vehicle to give form to these stories, subjects, and movements that exist in the entanglement of colonization and dispossession of land and peoples. Iris is an artist who works in painting, fibers. She is also a writer. In her work, one may encounter materials, stories, living organisms, and ecologies from Taiwan, California, Southern China, Mexico, and the American Southwest. She's interested in how people, places, and things are interconnected and networked, and how collaboration in the form of learning from, working with, and being in relation to can enable transformative futures and friendships. Her work has led her to form connections with historians, artists, scientists, keepers of traditions, and community organizers, and she centers learning and collaboration as methods of engagement. Her work is both research-based and dependent on lived experience, and she has shown in many different places, such as the Los Angeles Contemporary Exhibitions, or LACI, OxyArts at Occidental College, John Michael Kohler Arts Center, Los Angeles Municipal Art Gallery, Women's Center for Creative Work, Human Resources in Los Angeles, Lenfest Center for the Arts in New York, and Visitor Welcome Center, also in Los Angeles. Iris has also been commissioned for mural wraps at California State University, Dominguez Hills, and for bus and rail posters for the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. She has held residencies at the Women's Center for Creative Work, and most recently at Carrizozo AIR, and is currently in residence at the Los Angeles Cleantech Incubator, where she will develop creative projects to reorient ourselves in the immediacy of the changing environment. She's working on her first book, which I'm so excited to hear about, hopefully tonight, and is currently teaching fine arts at Otis College of Art and Design. Welcome, Iris.
Thank you so much, Nasrin and Jennifer. It's such a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for your introductions as well. Very moving to hear in which, or how you sort of map one's history throughout time and lands.
Thank you.
I think what we wanted to do tonight is keep it cool and casual.
Okay.
And I know, Iris, you wanted us to just maybe jump right into a conversation.
Yeah, I'm also prepared to share some work, maybe three bodies of work, but we can begin talking however you want to do it.
Okay, awesome. I don't know, Jen, if you have questions to begin.
Yeah, well, I did have a few questions that I've just been thinking about throughout the process of spending so much time with your work and learning about you. And I think so currently both Nasrin and I are mentors for a program here in Winnipeg with a few artists, and some of them are actually part of the exhibition as well. But I wanted to talk to you about your experiences with mentorship. And so, both learning, weaving from people, similar methods of, or not methods, but a similar product that you finish at the end, but very different methods of creating, different cultural significance, and how that's affected your practice and how you incorporate weaving into your practice.
Yeah, I think teaching and learning for me are sort of one and the same, and it's a way, it's a framework for me to sort of move within and about. I often seek these kinds of relationships in which like I can learn something or reorient myself sort of differently. And a lot of it has to do or motivated by this like wanting to return to the earth. And that is as poetic, as literal, as grand, as minute, as small as that means. And actually, I think that may be like a good segue into this one body of work that I worked on with Julia Bogany, who is a Tongva elder here. And the Tongva are the ancestral caretakers of the Los Angeles Basin, which is where I'm joining you from. And her great grandmother passed through what's called the San Gabriel Mission. And if you don't know, sort of California was part of Spain. And part of that meant that there was this Catholic mission system that was erected throughout the state from south to north. And San Gabriel was the site of the fourth Spanish mission, I think erected in 1776. And it was a place of Catholicism, but it was also a place of enslavement. A lot of Tongva people were forced to labor at the missions, as well as Tataviam folk whose lands are to the north in San Fernando Valley, what's typically known as the Valley in LA, as well as the Chumash, as well as other indigenous groups that were sort of brought from south and migrating upwards north. And I grew up near this mission, like 10 minutes away. And so part of my wanting to understand, and this place now, San Gabriel, is a huge immigrant hub. A lot of Asian immigrants, a lot of South and Central American immigrants, also second generation children of those who immigrated. And how it became this sort of immigrant hub was because after World War II, there were looser racial restrictions on who could rent and buy and own property. And so San Gabriel was one of these places. And so therefore my grandfather or my grandparents were able to purchase a home about 10 minutes away from this mission. I realize that I'm looking at the mission and no one else is looking at the mission. So let me just share my screen. So this is what this mission looks like. And I'll also put closed captions on. So, right, so this is the San Gabriel mission. Over the summer, it just kind of suffered a fire. But anyway, long story is that my grandparents are able to purchase a home about 10 minutes away from here. And the city motto is called City with a Mission, without any sort of acknowledgement of the indigenous history and presence that is ongoing here. And so I work with Julia Bogany, who is an elder and a cultural ambassador for the tribe. And her great-grandmother passed through this mission. And my wanting to work with Julia, and this is a piece that we made together, but my wanting to work with Julia really sort of came about from wanting to understand histories of this land and wanting to revise my understanding of who was here, who is still here, who will be here. And Julia was sort of the person that I was directed towards after attending a historical association meeting. And from meeting her, you know, Julia is so generous with her time and with her resources, and she teaches incessantly and oftentimes for free. She is the Pitzer College Native Elder in Residence currently. And Pitzer College is in Claremont, California. And so I began this relationship with her that really evolved into this sort of grandmotherly, grandchild type relationship in which we constantly sort of check in and ask each other different sort of questions about one another's lives, but also what began with like, you know, can you please tell me more about this history, this grave history, but it sort of evolved into something else. And Julia has a question that she strives to answer, which is, I always say Tongva women never left their ancestral homeland, they just became invisible. How do we make ourselves now not invisible is the question I ask every day. And so I think about this question as a guide as well, and a responsibility, a social responsibility that I think artists working in LA, you know, should propose, or so should sort of answer in a way, or think about. And I think about this question a lot, which is the sort of the result of that is this relationship that's developed with Julia, and the art and all that stuff. It is what drives the relationship, but it's not the result of it, if that makes sense. Like the art things that we make together are sort of like, they unfold as the relationship unfolds. And so this was done in 2018 with Julia, or one of her names is Wise Woman, sitting underneath an oak tree, and her grandmother's spirit sort of erupting from the oak tree. And the paper here are all hand-pulled paper out of local yucca leaves and oak leaves. And so there's a lot of native plants going on here, and some symbiosis going on with the butterfly and the oak tree. And this is Julia's two great-granddaughters, and this is Julia's book, Tongva Women Inspiring the Future. So this was done in 2018, which then earlier this year, or in the summer of this year, that work became a public mural. It's both public and also very specific. It's on the new student housing complex of California State University, Dominguez Hills, which is in Carson, Compton area. And this is sort of the first thing that one sees upon entering the campus. So, and through these slides, I'm trying to answer your question about how mentorship plays a role in my work. And it's hard to talk about because relationships are so organic, and they're also hard to maintain, and they also change. So the work sort of functions as a document of that time. But yeah.
Yeah, wow, thank you, Iris. I feel like in thinking about tonight and what was, you know, thinking about your work, and I think, you know, often we start that when Plugin was still open, we started the exhibition tours, we would start with your piece. And it would always feel like such like the best way to start the tour, because of how layered the installation is, but also because it opens up all this possibility for thinking right away, thinking differently right away. But it's also so difficult to put language to it. So I think just following in what you had just mentioned, I think I've been thinking a lot about the different ways in which these processes or these experiences really do have a time of their own, and that time feels to me as it's not yet expressible in language or in words. So it's often, I feel like I'm feeling it more than I am, more than I know what it is that I'm feeling, I guess, if that makes sense. But it's anyway, it's just a comment. It's not even really a question.
No, I think what your comment is just so beautiful, and I've been in my class that I teach at Otis. It's so much about embodiment and sort of leading with your senses and leading with things that, you know, have some sort of lingual delay or leading with in ways that what's the word? Leading in ways that language can't quite capture.
Mm-hmm.
And going with that and figuring out what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that you say that, so that as some of the talks have been happening, there's things that are connections between the artworks in the exhibition that have been coming up for me. So poetry being one of them, but language has played a large role in the exhibition as well. And I think, you know, I maybe didn't put it all together, but because so many of the people, actually probably everyone in this exhibition is so disconnected from the language of their ancestors, or are currently unable, based on where they live, to be able to consistently use that language. It's interesting to think about how language is something that can really connect us, even if we can't all understand each other. So there is this language that's emotional that we understand in each other's work, that speaks to something completely different than the words that we speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I also, so this is a really small question that I have, but I feel like it's something that brings me a lot of joy every time I walk around your piece, is the small embroidered rainbow on the back of the canvas. And I just was wondering if you could, not that you have to talk long about it, but you can if you have a lot to say about it, but to tell us a little bit about this, this joyful surprise at the back of the piece.
Yeah. Well, so the piece is depicting myself learning atayal weaving. Atayal is an indigenous Taiwanese group of people. And in a year or two ago, I went back to Taiwan with my parents, which is where they're from. It is where they're born, but not where they're ancestrally from. So my grandparents were, one set of grandparents were sort of forced out of mainland China. And the other set, there was more of a choice, in large quotes, involved. Although war doesn't really provide many choices. But so my parents, my dad identifies as Han Chinese. So his connection to his Hmong heritage was already severed by my grandmother. So he had assimilated into Han Taiwanese society, as well as my mom. And so the Chinese people that live in Taiwan, a lot of them had been there for generations, and a lot of them came post-war. And so they are a settler class, but I hesitate to use the word colonial, just because I'm not sure if the language is accurate. But they are a settler class. And so, you know, the indigenous people of Taiwan have suffered a similar fate to those who live in the US. And I thought about what kinship meant. And so part of that for me is about craft, because craft is technology that reverberates throughout time and space. I mean, you look at, you know, an indigenous Taiwanese footloom weaving, and then you look at the weaving in Guatemala, or you look at the weaving in Peru, so many connections. Not to say that they were all related at one point, or, you know, there's many ideas of why that would be, but through craft, you can really see how dependent people are on land and one another, and how many sort of connections there truly are. And so, long story, the rainbow is a bridge, mythologically and cosmically speaking, for the Atayal ancestors and the living to connect. And that bridge is made through the act of weaving. And then at the same time, in where I first exhibited this work, my partner's best friend had passed away. And I made a painting of him composting in the earth. We had dug his grave, and I made a little painting of that. And then before his funeral, I went up to see his husband just to spend some time with him. And then I saw 2 double rainbows going across the sky. And so the rainbow essentially was this like connection to Jeff, but also doubly connection to Jeff, who is now an ancestor, but also, you know, speaks to the sort of creation myth or origin myth of, not myth, story, of the Atayal. Yeah, long, sorry. There's always all these like threads, you have to get through it all.
It's amazing.
Yeah. I love every second of it, Iris. I think that was part of when you think writing the caption for your work was the hardest, because we didn't want to take out details that we felt were also important. And then, yeah, it was just, it was hard to summarize writing that caption.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
But it's so rich that way, and it's so full that way, which is what makes it so incredible. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if maybe that would be also a good moment to talk to the audience more about what's exhibited at Plugin, but it's also so connected to other works that you have, as you just mentioned too. So I feel like I'm more interested also to think about the ways in which I feel like the structures played a very important role in these installations that you have, which is, you know, that the framing is quite similar, and that there are a few pieces that are presented in this particular way. And I just wondering if you wanted to talk more about that, but also the color blue and how it really shows up in your work often.
Yeah, are you talking about the literal frame?
I'm talking about the Navajo frame, the loom frame. Yeah. Yeah,
I could talk about that. Let me just pull this up. So I would say my one true apprenticeship is with Melissa Cody. My work with Miss Irene Ural, who's the master weaver, who taught me how to weave on the foot loom. Because so much time has passed and, you know, she's there and I'm here. There's not, or like we connect through Line app. Our relationship is sort of both existent, but not really. But with Melissa, I help her with stuff. And I have a more tangible relationship to her. And so Melissa Cody is a 4th generation Navajo weaver and textile artist. And if you Google like contemporary Navajo weaving, like most of what you see is Melissa Cody's work. Actually, here is some of her work. And so this is all woven. This is all woven on is a tapestry weaving. And this is woven on the Navajo loom. And these are giant works. But I learned how to weave from her. This is her.
Are you showing us stuff, Iris?
Oh my gosh, yes I am.
Making sure we can't see it. Oh, there we go.
Right. Okay. So embarrassing. But anyway, so if you see, these are Melissa's weavings, and these are giant weavings. And this is all done on the Navajo loom, or on a loom, upright loom. And this is a tapestry loom, and this is Melissa, and this was us doing a demonstration for the Downtown Women's Center in Los Angeles. And then I have a little video of Melissa sort of talking about her work, but I don't know if you want to get into that. But essentially, this is how I work on my loom. Mm-hmm. And so this is what the work in the exhibition is alluding to. So it's a collapse, or it's bringing together these seemingly disparate weaving practices. And so the Navajo loom, which is not a functional loom, what's in the exhibition is not functional. This is what it is. But there is a connection between these two weaving practices, and it's through the C word, colonization. And actually, because when, Japan colonized Taiwan from 1895 to 1945, when they lost the war, they essentially coerced many indigenous people and the Han Chinese people that were already there to work in their plantations to cultivate camphor. And camphor is a tree. It can be produced to an oil. It was used to produce gunpowder. And it was also used as an ingredient in celluloid, which is the world's first thermoplastic, which is what many of old Hollywood films are filmed on. And so during this time, I was thinking like, wow, like our imagination of the great American West is like literally captured on celluloid, on this material that is from East Asia, and was cultivated largely through indigenous labor. And when they need indigenous labor, they make indigenous people give up their entire livelihoods, and weaving was a central component to Atayal life. And so when you take that away, you disrupt the entire society. And so bringing together these two weaving practices in a way was a sort of artistic suturing, perhaps, of time and space and scale and cultures. And I sort of wanted to get at that without being explicit about it, because so much of what we understand of materials and processes and people and ways are indirect and implicit. And the color blue, Yeah, the color blue is also like a bigger tenure or something research project or lifelong research project that begins with learning how to dye with indigo. And to be short about it, it's a way for me to tap into what was lost. And indigo is something that needs oxygen to yield blue. So I think about its connection to breath, to being alive, to death, to reproduction, to regeneration. And also because my father is Hmong and we don't know anything about that. And so the way to understand, to get close to what we don't know is through craft and is through dye practices and is through this color blue. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you for asking.
Oh, I think we have a question from the audience, maybe.
Sure.
Oh, I guess they're still typing it because they just said the
I have
question
a
was
question.
not finished. Yeah.
Question for you guys, or you.
Yeah.
How do you think friendship, how do you think looking to friendships can alter or bring about change as to how one organizes the set of relationships that are needed for an institution such as yours to function? Well, no, these things I'm thinking about, but just like,
I love it.
Just sitting in my room thinking about it.
I think about it every day, but I'm gonna let Jen take it first.
Okay. Well, so for me, I think what this, like working with Nasrin specifically, taught me was new thoughts about trust. And so, you know, in other spaces I work in, it's not that I don't trust the people I work with, but there isn't sort of because friendship isn't the foundation of why we're working together, we've never had discussions about trust or respect or our feelings about each other. And so I think that what happened for me during this exhibition that allowed me to also question, you know, the role that institutions played in the way that we were curating and what we needed to do to ensure that what we were doing was protected or central, I guess, to everything that happened is acknowledging that no matter what, we were here for each other and the artists that were part of the exhibition, and that caring was the thing that mattered the most. So you know, I always I know that deadlines are important, but deadlines weren't the most important thing, or the needs of the institution weren't the most important thing. And what does it mean if it moves forward the vision of an exhibition based in care to relook at budgets and the needs of where money goes or things like that. And so the institution has to be there because it is, but what, like for me, the entire process was about how do we look at all of those institutional needs from the needs of our care for this exhibition and each other first. So yeah, maybe that's a little formal, but that's for how it went for me.
No, it sounds like your budget, you know, your protocol is like rooted in a set of really specific relationships and like honoring that specificity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was it was really beautiful, and it was also like difficult and challenging. And I think because, you know, you realize when you push against the institution's demands, but those demands are just actually so non-urgent, you know, and so that things like deadlines or sending things out later than maybe we would have, or centering each other's well-being over getting things done, stuff like that. When you're in practice of that, you realize to what extent, yeah, those demands are just not that important, really, at the end of the day, because things will still get done and move in a certain direction and move in a way, but everyone will feel better anyway because of it. So I feel like, I'm not being very eloquent in terms of how I'm using my words right now, but I feel like these things were so important for me to notice and to feel and experience, because it brought a different perspective to how I want to move forward with any exhibition and any person who I work with, or any person who I even have a relationship with, that really prioritizing care for each other and care for the artists that we're working in opened up this possibility of actually really doing things differently and not just talking about it. Mm-hmm. It was really in practice, and it really felt concrete in that way. But there were hard moments, like for me too, where I was challenged. You know, I have the tendency to be a workaholic in a certain way, so that then I would in some ways take for granted that those habits were still in me. So it was also it was an eye-opener for myself personally.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah. There's so much to say about it. Yeah. And I think, again, it goes back to what you had said, Iris, about relationships like that. When you're in relation, it's just so organic, it's hard to, and I felt that way with Jen a lot also, is that I really felt like very lucky to have found a partner in this and in this way, and that we could work off of each other. And it was, I mean, Jen and I are so different, but I also feel like it was just so incredibly complementary and symbiotic in some ways. I don't know, Jen. Like, we are so different. So I think it's just funny thinking about it, because I learned, you know, so much about just like, you know, the value of also not, you know, what's the word? I don't know. I don't want to like also like, yeah, the value of like taking time with response.
Yeah. In a way, I think COVID sort of allowed for that. I don't know if you felt that on your end, but it sort of illuminated how inconsequential some urgencies are. Of course, it did the opposite as well. But yeah, I think when you're thinking with and in an institution or an organization, and with art, yeah, I don't know. I found my conversations and correspondence shift during this time as well. Certain relationships became deeper, and certain things that I thought were urgent, or certain relationships that I thought were, you know, a certain way. Didn't have to formulate that way.
Yeah, totally. We have a request from an audience member to maybe show more of your work, if you have images available.
Yeah, I just figured out how to do my own website. I'm really excited about it. So here you can see more of my work. This is the mural commission at Dominguez Hills. Okay. Yeah, so this is the entrance to the student housing complex. And this is a body of work made over 5 years. This is James Baldwin as a dragonfly dancing in the sky. Taken from a pretty famous picture of him dancing, I believe, with Lorraine Hainsbury. But there's some idea that the woman depicted is a core worker, but anyway, some ideas of who that woman is, but that's him. And that's me and my partner. This is a collaboration with Paula Wilson, who's a frequent collaborator of mine. She's an artist based in Carrizozo, New Mexico. And this was our mythical yucca. She does a lot of work about the New Mexican yucca and its symbiotic moth pollinator. And so the yucca and the moth, each yucca has its own moth that they co-evolved with one another, in which they're the only ones that can reproduce with one another. And so the chaparral yucca is native to Southern California. And we kind of combined the two yuccas together. Here's another one. This is also at the front entrance, but this is, it was a private commission that then got blown up, but looking at different lace making techniques in Croatia. This was some old work that was then combined. Jimmy Durham, Kendrick Lamar, my friend that's passed, Emi Kuriyama, and the Queen of Cups from the tarot deck, all sitting together in a blue vaginal birth canal, having some sort of conversation. And then this is, it's the same body of work, but a different iteration. And then this is some new work. It's me as Mystique from X-Men, crying into the earth, trying to give it water, where Storm's eyes are erupting with dry lightning across the desert landscape. This is a COVID painting in which I was like, oh, so close, but so far, but can't touch. Yeah, but the leaves are cottonwood leaves, which I've been sort of doing some research into that I don't know enough to share quite yet. But essentially, the type of weaving Melissa Cody does is Germantown revival, and Germantown weaving, you know, was a type of weaving that was started from tragedy during the Navajo the deportation of Navajo and Mescalero Apache people to Bosque Redondo, New Mexico, called the Long Walk. And it was the first time during this detention center called Fort Sumner, where Navajo and Apache Mescalero people were given rations, and part of the rations were woolens from Germantown, Pennsylvania, in a place where they manufactured Civil War woolens. And so the first aniline dyed yarns, 4-ply yarns, were produced there and shipped via the railroad to this place in central New Mexico. And from there, many Navajo women would unravel these woolens and reweave blankets and clothing. And so during this time, the pattern, the iconic Navajo pattern of the eye dazzler sort of came about. Anyway, so I went there. I went to Bosque Redondo, it's a memorial site now. and they planted a lot of cottonwood trees. And there's a story about the cottonwood trees and the people that were interned there, but I'm not going to share it because I don't remember exactly what happened. But that's kind of why the cottonwood appears in my work.
I think some people want to see the one at Plugin.
Oh.
But
there we are.
I realized, yeah. And anyone who's in Winnipeg right now, you could also see it from the windows.
So this is clay from Winnipeg that I requested Theo to harvest. And the original installation was my friend's clay that he had an installation right before mine, and then his clay dried up, and then I just used his. But this was intentional that it be from Winnipeg.
Yeah, and it's very, very old earth clay, pre-treaty clay, what Theo told us too. We do have another question from the audience. I guess it's for me and Jen too. Hi, I'm wondering if you can tell us when Iris's involvement in this exhibition began.
I mean, I'm starting this, but it also seems like it began in similar ways to how Nasrin and I came to work together, where relationships began far before the ideas of the exhibition ever came into play. So I'm saying that, but I'm going to leave it to Nasrin and Iris to continue that part of the conversation, because you were building a friendship and relationship long before this exhibition ever came to be.
Yeah, well, that was a long time ago.
Well, we met at my partner's space, Visitor Welcome Center, and Nasrin and I and Galare and Himada, we went to Joshua Tree.
We spent some time in Joshua Tree, that's right.
Galare is the solo exhibition.
Yeah, Galare is in the exhibition next door. And it was a time in my life where I was spending a lot of time meeting a lot of incredible people, a lot of incredible artists in Los Angeles. And Iris was one of those people who I met, along with Galare. And then when Jen and I were talking about this exhibition, I think it was at a dinner at your house, Jen, a long time ago. Actually, that was when it was before the pandemic hit. I remember we talked about whether we should go buy extra toilet paper. I remember that. That was like way in like February or like end of January or something. Yeah. And then I had mentioned your work, Iris, to Jen, and we had pulled up images of it on at the Visitor Welcome Center website, and then Jen right away said, I know the perfect kind of other artist where it could be a potential conversation, and it was with Megan's work. And that's how also Megan O'Brien became part of the exhibition. Was through our conversation, Jen saw a lot of similarity. Jen was familiar with Megan's work, and then I got introduced to Megan's work through that conversation. Yeah.
And I think that this idea that Iris, you brought up too, and I think for me it was there right from the beginning, is the idea, well, it's something that I've spent a lot of time researching, is craft as technology, and the way that craft is actually what has progressed technology throughout history. And so, Megan's work is a video that is very has been made in a animated way that used technology to create it, and the idea of technology being the force of a way that we get to see this hand-woven piece in a completely newly formed way, is something that I think like these connections of craft and technology really are there between both of your works, even though that, you know, your work doesn't have like an active electronic work in it, that idea is so present just because of yeah, I mean what I've already said, but the ways that craft and technology are always so connected. And so I think that it was so exciting to be able to bring together two works in the space, also myself having a huge leaning of researching craft, to have weaving be, you know, take up a lot of space in the gallery is really exciting for me.
Yeah. And it was incredible to see both works, the way they're positioned in the gallery. They are really looking at each other. And then they're also both, I mean, in Megan's work, it's really more obvious in the sense that it begins with a constellation and then it forms outward, and then you could see the entire blanket come together on the screen. But then Iris, I feel like yours is also in some ways a constellation of having brought all of these different relations into it, and that it's so emblematic of these relationships, as you said, that time is felt differently too when you look at that piece. And if it's obviously not, it's not an obvious constellation in the way we think of a constellation, but the composition is there creating those links and connections. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about like constellations when I think about my relationships to people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of a perfect word.
Mm-hmm.
We have a question from the audience. Hi, Iris, can you talk about the terms and conditions you have on your website and your thoughts on creating thoughtful boundaries with institutions?
I have this, I have on my website a fact page. I totally toned down the language because when I wrote it, I was initially livid. And then my friend was like, that's too harsh. So I recently toned it down. But essentially it's a fact page that kind of writes down questions as to like, I'm trying to pull it up. Yeah, you know, I think artists are often like in these really ambiguous spaces, and, you know, are often have like carrots dangled in front of them, or, you know, even the idea of a studio visit with somebody, you know, can get misconstrued, or the ask for a studio visit. And so I put on my website, you know, ways that I would like to be approached, in the spirit of just, you know, having friends that lead by example, that you know, outline their boundaries and outline their terms of working. So I felt that if I were clear, then there's no excuse for, you know, the other party to not be clear. And really, you know, it's my own thing. It's like, I would like to exhibit your work. How do I go about this? I welcome it. But then there are different ways. Like if you are a museum, a commercial gallery, a nonprofit, or a business, there are different ways of engaging. Or if you're an independent curator, or if you're just, you know, another, not just, sorry, or if you're another, you know, artist run space, there are different ways to sort of ways of working that I have, or like how do commissions work? And I do think maybe I have like an idealistic idea of how Canada is, but I do think this is a pretty US centric page, in that many US institutions refuse to pay their artists. And I think that just further complicates, you know, artists are already precarious or living in precarity. And so the art world in the US thrives on that precarity. And so this is just a way for me to like wanting to depend less on that world or that economic system.
We have another question. This is amazing. We have so many great questions coming in this evening. So Iris, in speaking about interconnectedness, multiple converging parts, and the complexities of ideas and concepts in your projects, how do you approach editing a work or installation? How do you make decisions? And also working collaboratively, how are aesthetic choices made?
Learn by doing. I started out mostly painting, so really just sort of two-dimensional. And then whenever I would be asked to like hang a show, I would just not know how to do it because I didn't know how to think about or see things as space. I don't know how to choreograph a space. And so that is just the more exhibition experience, the better I know how to do it. And also I have a wonderful partner with me who offers feedback and who's a great, has great ideas about how things are seen and how to sort of navigate space. And I'm lucky to have that. And how do I make decisions? I'm working collaboratively. Almost always I ask permission to, see if this works or this doesn't work. Can I include your, like, for instance, with Julia, it's a very different relationship than Melissa, right? And it's a very different relationship with Cyrene. Like Cyrene's like, oh, like not no one, but like fewer people in the West even can conceive of indigenous Taiwanese weaving. So by all means, like I promote that or like show that. Whereas with Melissa, things are a bit more careful. There's always permission asked. And Julia as well. I mean, in a city as big as Los Angeles, so few people know that there is an indigenous presence, multiple indigenous presences in Los Angeles. And so Julia's work is really dedicated to amplifying that. And so finding ways to uplift that is a collaboration. And the aesthetic choices is mostly myself. With Julia, that piece in particular, I was like, how do you want to see yourself represented? Like, where does your grandma come in? And she's like, oh, I want my grandma there or something. But that's kind of the extent. And so I'm like, oh, maybe grandma can be a spirit through the tree. I have an idea. I asked the question, but I sort of take it where I want or where we want it to go, but in my own way too. Yeah.
I think that also leads maybe into the next question, which says, since you work with Indigenous peoples and techniques, how do you navigate a respectful relationship that opposes appropriation, as is evident in the work that you presented?
Yeah, my work is a deep study. So I mean, I struggle with like, how do I distribute images of my work, or how are images of my work distributed, because they can be so easily misunderstood. So it comes with a lot of context. And permission is a really big part of it. And acknowledging that all exchanges are really unequal. And that there will probably never be an equal exchange. And so that's why I use the word permission rather than consent. I am working with, in the case of Julia, like I am working with an elder. First, she's an elderly lady. And secondly, she is a respected elder of her tribe. And so, I don't really do anything unless I ask her what she thinks. And same with Melissa, she had to ask her elders if she could teach me. she had to ask her elders if she could break out of the traditional styles of Navajo iconography. And I think it's about having a constant line of communication and asking what's okay, I think. Yeah, it's not really appropriation because I'm not taking symbols, or like I'm not taking, it's not an aesthetic experience for me. It's like it's a deep committed study in ethics too.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's a hard one to navigate, and I think in the US too, it's this whole land is here because of ideas of ownership and theft. So it's hard to move away from the framework of appropriation, I think. But I think in places like Taiwan, that's not really the central conversation. Yeah, just interesting ways to think about things moving forward.
I know we're sort of also coming to the end of our time together, so I want to sort of put that out there in case there's any more questions that sort of people want to get in. I think we've gone through all the ones that have come in. But Nasrin, I know I've asked a lot of questions. I don't know if you have anything else that you would like to ask about.
Yeah, I guess I had a question. I think I want to know about your book.
My book.
If you wanted to share.
Yeah, I don't know if that book is ever happening. Like, COVID. No, but I'm trying to, inspired by Ursula Le Guin. I'm sort of working on a fictional, imaginary anthropological book. So this anthropologist, I'm not sure if this is an artist anthropologist or an anthropologist, but they discover artifacts and a journal by a descendant of the Blue people. And this is a time, I haven't quite set the scene yet, but at this moment, I'm thinking this is a time when the US has basically privatized all lands. Many of the lands globally as well. And so the idea of the Blue people is that they're no more Blue people, they're only descendants of them. And the only way you know that you're a Blue person is through the act of storytelling and through the act of making art. And so inspired by things like X-Men, around the teenage years, a descendant of a Blue person would start to, start making art or start like working on their thing or working on their language or working on their dance or their poetry or their craft or whatever. And you can't identify them either from like race or skin color or gender, but it's thought that they come from all continents, but they don't have a homeland. And so only in their art making do they find a home, and only through their art making can they locate each other. So that's kind of the narrative, but the book takes that narrative and is a field journal left behind by this person called Blue Child. And this Blue Child is writing about the different relationships she's having with weaving, with Julia, with different people. It's kind of a magical framework for myself to write about my collaborations.
Wow. Well, I can't wait.
Better than it sounds. Like, hopefully, like, the excitement doesn't just end right there. But yeah.
I'm so excited for it. Just the idea of even being like, this is what I struggle with often in terms of just like a diasporic positioning, what does it mean to not be attached to this notion of a homeland or even experience that as someone who's never been to their own lands or and never had that kind of relationship or experience. So it's like, yeah, putting that into this kind of conceptualization is, anyway, I'm excited for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Nasrin. Yeah, I mean, when I was given the opportunity to go see where my great grandparents were buried, whose graves were moved because there was a dam that was constructed nearby, it became apparent to me very quickly how sort of futile it was to do that. I mean, it was obviously meaningful, but it was like, wow, I thought I would feel something or find something to be in my roots. But in doing so, I realized like we come from so many different places and we're made up of so many different, like literally dust, the dust we carry, the like things that we carry from place to place, they're all embodied.
I think before we end too, I just want to acknowledge Jen. Jen has often said that, you know, the experience of putting on this exhibition really comes from an Indigenous worldview and an Indigenous way of thinking and experience. And I just wanted to acknowledge that I feel very privileged and honored to have done that, Jen, and learned that from you as well, Jen, that we were able to do this together in a way that it is very much based in the teachings that you have brought forward in this way and that you have recognized them to be that way. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, Jen.
It's an honor to hear that. Thank you. And Iris, I just wanted to make sure that I know the time seemed to go by so fast, but that you also got to share with us everything that you were hoping to share this evening before we sort of wrap up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nasrin and Jen, for inviting me to do this, and also to the questions. Yeah.
Well, thank you. This was a truly wonderful evening. I feel so grateful for everything you said. I was trying to like not look down and write notes, so I have some really notes I hope I can decipher later, because there was a lot that you said that I really will be revisiting quite often as I think through this exhibit, but future exhibits as well. So I really appreciate that.
I appreciate that. That's so meaningful. I mean, it's a time where I feel like so many artists are actually like questioning what's the function of art and the function of being an artist. That's really meaningful to me.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to just maybe also talk or like to wrap us up, just to mention that I'm just going to find my notes to make sure I'm saying exactly what I want to say. That we do still have a program online right now. So we have a screening or an online videos and film screening curated by Mariana Munoz Gomez and Marianne Redhead. And they brought this program together in response to our exhibition. And it's accessible for free on vukavu.com until November 18th. So just 2 more days to catch that. Our next event will be a poetry reading with Melanie Montseros on November 26th. And it's also really cool because Melanie will be giving an artist talk right after for another organization. So we'll have this amazing evening of Mel, which I think will be such a wonderful experience for everyone to get to hear their poetry along with getting to learn about their practice. And so for more information, you can go to Gallery 1CO3 or plug in ICA's website. And I just want to thank everyone who attended tonight and thank Nasrin and Iris for everything that's happened throughout this exhibition. It's been such a pleasure to get to know you, Iris, in the ways that we've been able to and to experience your work.
Thank you so much. Really.
Okay, well, I I guess we're ready to sign off. It feels weird to do that, but thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, bye. Thank
Good
you.
night, everyone.